The soft click of the lock reverberated in the suddenly oppressive silence of my entryway. Returning from the urban sprawl of the downtown market, I was met not by the familiar hush of our apartment, but by a peculiar tableau. Two scented candles, glowing warmly, cast dancing shadows in the hallway. This was the first anomaly. Celeste never lit candles. They make the place smell like artificial peace, she'd often quipped. The second unsettling detail was a crumpled, cardinal red silk kimono tossed carelessly on the polished concrete floor. The very garment I'd gifted her last Yule, which she'd deemed too theatrical for our minimalist home. And then from beyond the closed bedroom door, the unmistakable rush of the shower. Celeste! My voice, a ragged whisper, hung in the air. No reply. Every step I took toward our bedroom felt heavy, weighted with an unspoken premonition. I halted abruptly, my gaze fixed on a bold handwritten note taped to the sleek, dark wood of the bathroom door. Do not come in, just read. Scrawled in thick, black ink, the stark command seemed to vibrate with a hidden intensity. I stood there, the rhythmic spray of water against porcelain amplifying in the sudden stillness, my heart hammering like a trapped bird. It felt like I was moments away from losing something I hadn't even realized was on the brink of vanishing. The note, stark and unwavering, laid out her demand. Lysander, I've asked for many things in our marriage. For space, for silence, for understanding. Tonight I'm asking for the one thing I know you won't fathom, a single night with another man. You can rage, you can weep, you can pack your bags, or you can astonish me. But whatever you choose, please do not knock. 5 minutes stretched into an eternity. I remained rooted, a statue carved from dread, like a child paralyzed outside a headmaster's stern office. I didn't knock. I didn't enter. I didn't even utter a sound. Instead, a peculiar resolve hardened within me. I retreated to the garage, retrieved the large white magnetic board from its hook by the utility sink, wiped its surface clean, and inscribed two precise words. Choose one. Beneath I meticulously sketched two arrows. The left arrow pointed to the left door, signifying your new path. The right arrow to the right door bore the chilling phrase, the truth about mine. I carefully positioned the board on the hallway floor, precisely equidistant between our two bedroom doors. One, the portal to her illicit fantasy, the other, the entrance to my solitary studio. And then I waited. Shrouded in the dim light, I sat, breath held, listening. She thought she was the sole keeper of secrets. She was profoundly mistaken. The door didn't swing open immediately. First, the shower's hiss died, replaced by an unnerving silence. No hurried footsteps, no creaking floorboards, just the kind of quiet that dares you to shatter it. I waited, my fingers absently tracing patterns on the armrest of my studio chair. She always meticulously scripted her life, every moment choreographed. This unscripted challenge, this wrench in her carefully constructed narrative, would undoubtedly rattle her. Ready to learn the shocking truth about how far someone will go when their control slips? Finally, I heard the soft padding of her bare feet on the cool tile of the hallway. A pause. Then the almost imperceptible gasp as her breath hitched. She'd found the board. I pictured her standing there, her eyes oscillating between the stark choices. Left, her audacious new beginning. Right, the buried revelations of my existence. It wasn't merely symbolic. She understood the profound weight of each option. The left door led to the outside, to a life without me. The right door, to my studio, to a truth I had meticulously guarded for years, not out of malice, but from a misguided belief that shielding her from my true self was an act of protection. The doorknob rotated with agonizing slowness. She chose the right. I remained perfectly still as she stepped into the studio's soft glow. Her eyes, wide and bewildered, met mine. Her auburn hair, damp tendrils clinging to her neck, framed a face drained of color. Her silk kimono, now slightly askew, clung to her frame. "What is this, Lysander?" she whispered, her voice laced with the suspicion of a predator's trap. I rose deliberately, pulled open the bottom drawer of my antique desk, and extracted a thick, beige folder sealed for 3 years. I extended it to her. Before you chase another man for a flicker of excitement, perhaps you should understand the man you actually married. Her fingers, adorned with our platinum band, trembled as she opened it. The color bled from her face as she flipped through the contents. Photographs, meticulously documented receipts, encrypted digital files, none illegal, yet all profoundly secret. The phantom offshore account, the weekly therapy sessions I'd never mentioned, the covert surveillance footage from 2 months prior. The night she claimed was a girls' night at a rooftop hotel bar where no other women ever appeared. She hadn't even registered my presence, 4 tables away, sipping a lukewarm herbal tea. I'd said nothing then. Now, her hand shook violently as she reached the final page. A grainy photo of me, alone on that balcony, holding our wedding ring delicately between 2 fingers, as if poised to let it slip into the oblivion below. "You knew," she breathed, her voice fracturing. "I waited," I replied, my gaze unwavering, "because I desperately wanted to believe you'd pull yourself back from the edge." She sank into the nearby armchair, the red kimono slipping further open. Not that it mattered anymore, apparently. I leaned forward. "Now, Celeste, it's my turn," I said, the words sharp. "Pick again." She sat there frozen for what felt like an eternity before she even registered the kimono sliding off her shoulder. In the past, I would have averted my eyes, perhaps offered her a throw. Now I simply watched her fumbling attempts to pull it back up, as if modesty had abruptly regained its importance. The delicate balance of power had irrevocably shifted. She was no longer the architect of this narrative, no longer the one delivering shocking ultimatums in carefully penned letters. She had chosen the right door, the door to my studio, the door labeled "The Truth About Mine." But she had no conception of the sheer volume of truth I was prepared to lay before her tonight. "You had someone follow me?" she finally managed, forcing a bitter, brittle smile, her eyes still fixated on the damning contents of the folder. "That's truly rich, Lysander." I shook my head slowly. "No one followed you. I followed you." Her eyes blinked, a flicker of genuine shock. "You? I sat 4 tables behind you," I reiterated, my voice devoid of emotion. "You ordered a whiskey sour. He had a single malt scotch. You were laughing before you even took your seat." Her lips parted, poised to deny, to construct some flimsy excuse about misunderstanding. But something in my delivery, in the unvarnished finality of my words, silenced her. The lie would have been pathetically transparent. "I was going to tell you," she mumbled, running a hand through her damp, disheveled hair. "It wasn't serious." "It was serious enough to write a letter," I interjected, cutting her off. Her gaze dropped to the floor. "It wasn't about him. It was about what I've been missing. About feeling utterly dead inside. And you genuinely believed another man's bed would resuscitate you?" My words landed like a series of unexpected blows, but I wasn't finished. "I have a crucial question for you, Celeste," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. She looked up, apprehension etched on her face. "Would you have told me, at all," I pressed, "if I hadn't discovered that letter?" She flinched. That infinitesimal flinch spoke volumes. 95% of relationships fail because one partner refuses to ask this simple, devastating question. I stood, walked to the antique closet, and retrieved a small, ornate metal box I hadn't touched since last Yule. Her eyes, wide and uncertain, tracked my every movement. The same eyes she used when she'd forgotten a bill or scratched the car, hoping my anger wouldn't erupt. I placed the box on the table between us and opened it with agonizing slowness. Nestled within, gleaming softly, was the ring I'd commissioned after our 7th anniversary. A second wedding ring, custom designed, intricately engraved, never given. Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. "I was going to surprise you with it," I stated, my voice flat. "But you were too preoccupied being somewhere else, with someone else, feeling alive." She reached for it, but I closed the box with a definitive snap before her fingers could make contact. And then I asked the real question, the one that tore at the very fabric of our shared history. Would you have come back tonight if I hadn't intercepted you? Her silence was the only answer I needed. She eventually broke it, a whisper so faint I almost missed it. I hadn't decided yet. That sentence, innocuous on the surface, felt like a bullet wrapped in velvet, soft, outwardly gentle, but devastating upon impact. I tilted my head slightly, trying to fully grasp its chilling implication. Hadn't decided yet, as if our entire marriage was a dinner reservation, and she hadn't committed to the appetizer. Hadn't decided, I repeated slowly, my voice colder than I intended. So, you were waiting to see if he was more charming than me today? If I annoyed you one more time before 6 o'clock? She looked away, shame coloring her cheeks, but not quite enough. There remained a flicker of that subtle arrogance she always wore when she believed herself intellectually superior, the kind she displayed when explaining her need for space to think, which invariably translated to a weekend getaway devoid of my questions. She began, but I held up a hand, silencing her. I'm not asking for another excuse. I'm asking for absolute clarity. She folded her arms, clutching the red kimono tightly around her, as if suddenly chilled to the bone. You weren't supposed to find the letter yet. That made me laugh, a dry, humorless sound that confirmed every suspicion I'd harbored. So, you meticulously timed it. You laid a deliberate trap for me to walk into once you were already gone. I wanted to talk to you tomorrow, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. When I had the right words. I stared at her, incredulous. You actually believed you could shatter everything we meticulously built and then return to deliver a rehearsed speech? No, she said quickly, then faltered. Yes, I don't know. I rose and began pacing the studio, the plush rug beneath my feet feeling like unstable quicksand. Do you know what the truly insane part is? I muttered, more to myself than to her. I would have forgiven you if you had simply told me the truth when this started. If you had sat me down and said, Lysander, I'm utterly lost, and I no longer know how to be your wife. I would have fought tooth and nail for us. That stopped her cold. She stared at me as if I'd just articulated complex equations in a language she never knew I possessed. But you didn't come to me. You went to him. And then you planned to leave me a letter, as if I'm some casual acquaintance who deserves a breakup note taped to the refrigerator. Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't wipe them away. She simply let them fall, tracing paths down her cheeks, which somehow made it worse. This was always her pattern: show raw emotion only when cornered, never preemptively, never when it truly mattered. I don't want to lose you, she whispered, the words barely audible. I walked toward her slowly, deliberately. Then you should have comprehended what losing me looked like before you considered renting someone else's body for the night. I retrieved the choice board, erased both arrows, and scrawled a single damning word in the center. Cost. And then I told her, my voice steel, now you get to experience what it feels like to earn your way back, if you even can. She offered no immediate response. Her lips parted, poised to utter something profound, something redemptive, but then she pressed them firmly together. Good. I'd had an abundance of her words, words that consistently swerved around the truth, landing nowhere. For once I craved action, change, undeniable proof that her sorrow wasn't merely a byproduct of being caught. I placed the board, emblazoned with the solitary word cost, on the desk between us, like a final exam she'd recklessly failed to study for. Her eyes flicked down to it, then up to mine, searching for some hidden loophole. There was none. I had ensured that. You claimed you hadn't decided. I began slowly, each word a precise cut. But you wrote that note. You lit those candles. You ran the shower. You weren't undecided, Celeste. You were ready. You just didn't anticipate me being here, standing here when you emerged. I wasn't going to go through with it, she insisted, but the words landed limply, lacking conviction. Even she didn't sound persuaded. I watched you, I reminded her, my voice flat. I watched you laugh at his mediocre jokes. I watched you lean in. I watched you touch his wrist as if it meant something profound. Don't insult both of us by pretending you were still loyal in your heart simply because your body hadn't yet caught up. Her eyes flared, but she offered no denial. That in itself was the first truly honest moment we had shared in months. I turned and opened a drawer she hadn't touched in years. Inside were the journals I'd been keeping. Not personal diaries, but meticulous ledgers. Records of the countless, subtle ways our marriage had unraveled. My notes on the unexplained late calls, the sudden, convenient overtime, the name Elias appearing twice on our joint credit card statements under restaurant charges I'd never shared. I had deliberately kept all of this from her until now. I wanted to see exactly how far she would drift without my intervention. Now she stood there confronted by years of documented neglect, betrayal, and a devastating silence. All precisely recorded, dated, categorized. I saw her knees buckle almost imperceptibly, as if the sheer weight of it finally registered. "You want a chance to rebuild this?" I asked, my voice cutting through the heavy air. "Then here's precisely what it will cost." I handed her the first journal, its worn cover seeming to radiate unspoken truths. "Start reading, not to argue, not to justify, but to genuinely comprehend the magnitude of the damage you've inflicted." "I don't need to read it," she whispered, trembling, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. "I know what I did." "No," I said firmly, my gaze unyielding. "You think you do, but if you truly knew, you wouldn't be standing here in a kimono that wasn't meant for me, beside candles lit for someone else." She looked down at the journal in her hand as if it might physically burn her. Then slowly she sat down and opened the first page. Her fingers trembled, but she began to turn the pages, and I quietly exited the room. No dramatic slamming of doors, no shouted threats, just a profound silence that seemed to make her flinch more acutely than any outburst ever could. From that precise moment onward, the intricate, dangerous game was no longer hers to control. She had desired one night of unbridled freedom. Now she had one long night to confront and decide if she could truly live with the exorbitant cost her freedom had almost exacted. And I, for the first time, was no longer afraid of her eventual answer. Sleep found me only in fitful, fleeting snatches that night. I lay in the guest room, the room we had once jokingly called the spare, before we both instinctively knew it would eventually become my permanent refuge. Every creak, every subtle shift from down the hall made me tense. Pages turning, the faint groan of the armchair as she shifted her weight, the occasional hushed sniffle I knew she desperately hoped I wouldn't hear. Good. Let her feel it. Let her absorb the detailed accounts of the birthdays she'd forgotten, the elaborate dinners I'd cooked that had grown cold on the table, the one-sided conversations where her eyes were glued to her phone, treating my words as mere background noise. That journal wasn't merely a record of my heartbreak. It was her exhaustive syllabus for everything she had systematically, relentlessly dismantled, line by agonizing line. At precisely 3:17 a.m., I heard her door ease open, followed by an immediate profound silence. She didn't knock. I didn't stir. Minutes stretched into a small eternity. Then I heard the soft, almost imperceptible shuffle of paper. Something had been slipped beneath my door. My stomach lurched, a cold knot of apprehension tightening within me. Was this her letter to me now? Her rebuttal? Her carefully constructed counter-narrative? I sat up abruptly, switched on the bedside lamp, and reached for the paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a single dog-eared page torn directly from one of my journals. My own handwriting, one of the earliest entries, dated 2 years prior. I wonder if she'd even notice if I simply stopped trying, if I became nothing more than furniture, predictable, quiet, utterly invisible. I fear I already have. There was nothing added by her. No apology, no explanation, no desperate plea. Just my own words returned to me like a haunting mirror. It wasn't an answer. It was a stark admission, perhaps even a quiet surrender. At 6 a.m., I meticulously brewed coffee, then settled at the kitchen table, just as I used to before the quiet erosion began. She walked in an hour later, looking as if she too hadn't slept. The red kimono was gone, replaced by one of my old oversized hoodies, a garment she invariably wore when she sought to appear smaller, more innocuous, less formidable. I didn't buy it for a second. She sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly on the table, a nervous gesture. I read it all, Lysander, she said, her voice strained, raspy. I had no idea half of what you were keeping hidden. That, Celeste, was precisely the point, I responded, my voice devoid of emotion. You never bothered to ask. She nodded slowly, a profound weariness settling over her features. And I understand now that I can't simply fix this with a fleeting apology or a performative weekend of making things up to you. I offered no response, letting her words hang in the still air. I'm not going to see Elias again, she added quickly, almost desperately. I blocked his number. That, Celeste, I countered, my gaze unwavering, is damage control, not genuine repair. She flinched, the words striking home. Then tell me, she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. What does genuine repair even look like, please? I stared at her for a long, deliberate moment before finally speaking. Do you truly, honestly want to fix this? She nodded, her resolve fragile but present. Then quit your job today. Her face froze, a mask of disbelief. What? That's where it began, I stated, my voice unwavering. That's where the toxic secrets took root and spread. You meticulously constructed an entire second life there. If you genuinely want to salvage this one, then you must utterly burn the other to the ground. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, searching for words that wouldn't come. That's an enormous thing to ask. So was asking me to wait here, alone, while you indulged in your alive moment in someone else's arms. Silence descended once more, heavier than before. I'm not demanding you jettison your entire career, I clarified, though my words carried immense weight. I'm asking you to unequivocally prove that this marriage holds more significance to you than your carefully curated professional image, than your suffocating need for control, than your flirtatious office lunch breaks and those convenient late-night debriefs you so consistently forgot to mention. She looked on the verge of tears, but she didn't cry. Instead, she merely nodded once, stiffly, her face a mask of weary resignation. I'll draft the email, she whispered, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I almost believed her. I watched her, a silent observer, as she began to type the email. Every keystroke resonated with an unnatural weight, each letter seemingly heavier than the last. Her hands trembled slightly. Not, I sense, from fear, but from the dawning, painful realization that consequences weren't just abstract concepts in other people's stories. She had always lived as if she were the singular exception, the one who could bend all the rules without ever actually breaking them. But now, sitting there in my faded hoodie, meticulously typing out the definitive end of her professional life as she knew it, she finally grasped the profound meaning of paying for something in full. This changed my life in 30 days, understanding that actions always have a price. I offered no guidance on what to write. I didn't hover. I simply stood in the doorway, observing from a measured distance, allowing her to shoulder the full, crushing gravity of her own choices. She hit send. There was no dramatic sigh, no fresh tears, just a slow, almost defeated lean back in the chair, as if something fundamental in her spine had suddenly softened and given way. It's done, she murmured, her eyes fixed blankly ahead. I nodded once, a single understated acknowledgement. Good. The silence that followed was fundamentally different from the one we had lived in before. It wasn't laced with anger or awkwardness. It was a transitional silence, the hushed pause of two people waiting, holding their breath, to see what might possibly grow from the very ashes they had created. For the next few days, our interactions remained minimal, starkly functional. She prepared breakfast, but without the customary inquiry about my preferences. I confined myself to the guest room, refraining from mentioning the persistent chill. We coexisted within the confines of a house that seemed no longer to recognize us, as if the very walls themselves were attempting to forget the history they had witnessed. Then on the fourth night, an almost imperceptible shift occurred. I returned late from a long, aimless walk, one of those introspective trudges where your feet carry you forward, but your mind stubbornly refuses to follow. On the kitchen island, a small, unassuming wooden box awaited me. No note, no card, just the box itself, lid ajar, revealing a single, tarnished key nestled within. It wasn't a house key, nor a car key. It was the key to her private storage unit. I'd only become aware of its existence months prior, a tiny transaction buried deep within our bank statements. When I'd inquired about it back then, she'd dismissed it casually. Oh, just old art supplies, stuff from college I couldn't bear to part with. But now she was offering me the key. No excuses, no dramatic preamble, just a silent, profound offering. At 3 a.m., a stranger called and said, "But this key was left for me." I didn't ask for permission. The following morning, driven by an urgent, quiet curiosity, I went. The storage unit was surprisingly sparse, nearly empty save for one long, opaque plastic container, a single sealed cardboard box, and an old battered office chair. I reached for the cardboard box first. Inside, I discovered dozens of letters, none addressed to me. They were all to Elias. Not emails, not ephemeral texts, but actual, tangible letters. Some meticulously folded, some torn, some tragically unfinished. She had written to him as if living a parallel existence, confessing her deepest fears, her simmering frustrations, her wildest fantasies. Some were dated months ago, predating the red kimono and the fateful note. One, chillingly, was dated just 2 days before she had silently handed me the key. I sat on the cold concrete floor and read for over an hour, poring over her desperate, vulnerable words. And strangely, it no longer felt like a raw act of betrayal. Instead, it felt like witnessing someone slowly, agonizingly unravel, like reading the intimate diary of a person drowning who stubbornly refused to cry for help because they couldn't bear to appear weak. When I returned home, she was waiting, perched silently on the edge of the sofa. "I knew you'd go," she said softly, her voice raspy, weary. I let the key drop onto the kitchen island, a dull clink echoing in the quiet space. "You were in love with him, Celeste," I stated. Not a question, but a profound observation. She nodded slowly, a ghost of her former defiance in her eyes. "Yes, but I don't think I even truly understood what love meant until I watched you not leave." Her words, intended to soothe, should have filled me with a sense of righteous strength, of vindication. But all I felt was an overwhelming, soul-deep exhaustion. "I didn't stay for you," I clarified, my voice hollow. "I stayed because I needed to see if I still existed within this marriage." She took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Do you?" she asked, her voice trembling. I offered no immediate answer, because honestly, I didn't know yet. We didn't miraculously fix things overnight. That's not how the fragile, complex architecture of a broken marriage operates. You can't simply glue a shattered glass and expect it to hold water again. But you can melt it down, reshape it, patiently forge something new, something fundamentally different. And that, in the arduous weeks and months that followed, is precisely what we painstakingly set about doing. Not a nostalgic return to who we once were, but a slow, often clumsy, deliberate construction of something we had never been before. Honest. A month after she resigned from her job, we sought the aid of a counselor. Not because I inherently believed in the efficacy of therapy, but because I desperately needed an impartial referee, an objective third party to call out the fouls I was simply too exhausted to name anymore. And in those sessions, I uncovered a truth I had never anticipated. I, too, had utterly disappeared. Not into another person's arms, not into a labyrinth of secrets, but into a suffocating shroud of silence. I had remained quiet for so long that I had forgotten the very act of being heard. She listened, truly listened, for the first time in years. There were no immediate defenses, no dismissive half-nods while furtively checking her phone. She sat there week after week as I painstakingly unpacked the profound grief of witnessing her drift away, the searing humiliation of knowing I wasn't enough to halt her trajectory, and the quiet, simmering rage of never once being asked what I truly needed. In return, she finally, haltingly, opened up about things I had no inkling resided within her. The gnawing fear of aging, the profound shame of feeling utterly numb, the insidious way success made her feel more trapped than truly free. I didn't forgive everything, not immediately, but I understood far more than I had ever thought possible. Eventually, we took down the stark whiteboard with its two arrows. She wanted to dispose of it entirely. No, I said, my voice firm. We instead hung it in the garage, a stark, daily reminder that we remained every single day just one critical decision away from being strangers. Today, we are still married, still painstakingly learning. And yes, sometimes I still catch myself watching her, like a stranger in my own house, trying to piece together the fractured journey that brought us here. But now when she catches my gaze instead of recoiling or pulling away, she walks over and sits quietly beside me. Last week, I discovered a small, unassuming blue envelope in the kitchen. My stomach twisted instinctively, a ghost of old trauma never fully fading. But inside, there was a single folded note. "Thank you for picking the door that led back to me," I cried when I read it. Ugly, unreserved sobs. Then I sat down and began writing this. Because not every story has to culminate in fire. Some simply require a cleansing, furious storm to wash everything clean. Have you ever given someone two choices that irrevocably altered everything? Or perhaps you were the one who had to choose? Tell us your story in the comments below.